The air inside Dry Ridge Base throbbed with the buzz of machines and voices that didn't stop to breathe. Steel carts' clattered boots echoed off the concrete, and autopack units hummed as they folded parachutes with the precision of factory lines. Screens blinked green. For-go techs barked numbers over radios, and fresh-faced officers strutted between prep zones, goggles-up gloves tucked into their belts like badges of speed. Near the far wall, away from the motion and noise, a woman in a plain brown jumpsuit knelt on an old canvas mat. Her hair was tied back tight, her shoulders steady. She didn't look up when people walked by or when someone shouted across the hangar, not even when a tech stepped over her line, as if she wasn't there. Her name wasn't on her back. No patch marked her unit. She guided a yellow waxed cord through loops with the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what matters and what doesn't. Her fingers worked slowly, pulling the fabric taut, folding it flat, like she had all the time in the world. Around her, laughter broke out as another machine finished a pack in under a minute and beeped twice in approval. No one noticed the old-style rig beside her laid open like a secret, its panels smoothed by hand instead of rollers. No one paused to ask why she still used cord instead of digital sealants, or why she pressed each crease down with her palm. She was background forgotten, useful, only in the way tools are when stored away neatly and without complaint. A young officer with mirrored shades brushed past and didn't see her at all. Another shouted about lift thresholds and calibration rates as his boots scraped near her mat. Ellie kept working, folding and tucking, her wrists rotating with quiet rhythm, the waxed cord coiling into place like it was following her breath. The contrast was sharp but unspoken. Where others moved fast, she moved right. Where machines clicked and spat approval, she judged only by feel and memory. She didn't argue. She didn't compete. She folded like someone who knew what failure cost. Outside, the wind pressed against the hangar doors, dry and restless. Inside, Ellie Hayes never looked up. She didn't need to. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there because what she did still mattered, even if no one remembered why. Section 1. Introducing the main character, the invisible expert. Ellie Hayes arrived at the base each morning just before the lights flickered on. She entered through the back gate past the security checkpoint that barely looked up when she flashed her laminated badge. The guard knew her only as support tech temporary and waved her through without a word. She liked it that way. Fewer eyes meant fewer questions. She walked straight to the hangar, rolled out her canvas mat, and began her work without waiting for instruction. Ellie's jumpsuit was always clean but faded in color, its knees worn from hours spent kneeling on concrete. Her boots, too, showed their age. The leather had softened around the ankles, scuffed along the toes from years of silent steps and weighted crouches. No one noticed those boots. No one asked where she'd gotten the mat that looked older than some of the lieutenants barking about calibration times. They just assumed she came with the gear some surplus worker brought in on short notice to fold and load whatever the machines hadn't gotten to yet. But Ellie didn't just fold. She moved like someone trained, someone practiced beyond habit. Her hands lined and rough-worked with quiet authority. She didn't rush, didn't double-check, didn't need to. Her touch was confident, not in the way of someone trying to prove a point, but of someone who'd done this longer than anyone cared to count. The others didn't see that. To them, she was the woman in the corner with the old chute and a roll of yellow cord. They passed her with jokes under their breath, called her Grandma Rig, or teased each other about catching her 1970s technique. One officer once left a paper cup on her crate, like it was a spare table. She moved it without comment and kept folding. It never seemed to bother her. She didn't glare. She didn't flinch when they laughed or sighed when they mocked her hands or her posture or her slow, steady way. She simply kept doing what she came to do. Sometimes a new tech or cadet would glance over, curious about why she still used manual tucks and tension testing instead of just running the chute through the latest autopack roller. They never asked. They just turned away when a senior officer scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. She kept a notebook in her back pocket. The cover was bent, its corners soft. No one knew what she wrote in it, and no one cared enough to check. Most assumed it was her lunch log or some old checklist from the vendor that hired her. Ellie never pulled it out while others were around. She didn't like to draw attention. Her daily routine didn't change. She folded 3 to 5 chutes by hand each morning, paused to inspect the seams of each one, then knotted the line with a small, firm pull that felt more like habit than decision. She didn't mark them with anything special. Just a tucked cord here, a tight loop there. Small patterns that meant nothing to those who didn't know how to look. By afternoon, the noise in the hangar grew louder. The machines fired up and rolled, hissing steam and clipping tension lines. Officers moved faster, their chatter sharper. Ellie would step aside, roll her mat up, and tuck it under the bench. Then she'd take a seat with the other support crew, always last in line for lunch, and first out of sight when the instructors called names. She didn't mind. She never pushed to be seen. She had done enough pushing once, but not anymore. Her face was calm, creased by time, but not regret. Her eyes were steady, the kind that didn't dart or look for approval. Her presence had weight even if no one measured it. They all missed it. They missed the way her fingers hovered just slightly before touching a line. They didn't see how she ran her thumb along a seam like she could hear what it was telling her. They didn't notice the patience in her breathing, or the slight shift in her shoulder when a fold wasn't sitting right. And she didn't expect them to. Recognition wasn't what she came back for. Ellie Hayes existed in the margins of the base, quiet, capable and unseen, but every chute she packed carried something others didn't. It wasn't just the fabric or the line or the knots. It was the care. And care, once embedded, doesn't ask to be noticed. It just waits to be needed. Section 2. Setting the scene. A base that forgot its roots. Dry Ridge wasn't the kind of base built for tradition. It was designed for speed, precision, and automation. From the outside, it looked like a slice of the future dropped in the middle of desert rock and scrub. Inside, everything moved fast. Drones buzzed in overhead, unloading gear by algorithm. Parachutes were packed by machines the size of SUVs, their rollers spinning with a rhythm that felt more like a factory line than military prep. The walls were lined with screens, each showing real-time diagnostics, altitude calibrations, and drop simulations. Young officers in polished boots drifted between workstations, their voices clipped, their grins wide. Most of them walked like they'd already made rank shoulders. Back eyes, forward, used to being watched. They trusted the numbers, the graphs, the auto-confirm lights that blinked green before every jump. Trust was built into the code. The machines folded faster than any hand could and were programmed to measure every thread's tension. Most of the officers had never even seen a manual rig packed in real time. They didn't need to. At least that's what they told each other. The hangar pulsed with energy. Music played low over the speakers, a steady beat layered beneath the voices of instructors calling out schedules and jump orders. Gear clanked, oxygen tanks hissed, and somewhere in the back a hydraulics arm let out a mechanical sigh. That's where she sat, back corner, floor level, no music, no flashing screens, just a mat. Ellie Hayes looked like someone who had gotten lost on the way to a different decade. Her canvas mat was older than most of the lieutenants standing on it. The waxed yellow cord at her side looked handmade, and her chute panels were laid out by eye, not by laser. No one questioned her directly. They didn't have to. Their eyes said enough as they passed her by without stopping. Some glanced over with smirks, others didn't look at all. She didn't wear any of the new tech. No smart gloves, no HUD-linked monitors, no auto-alignment goggles. Just her hands. They moved with the slow confidence of someone who wasn't trying to catch up with the present because she had already lived through what others hadn't. At Dry Ridge, results were measured in clicks and clearances. The fewer errors, the better, the quicker, the better. Machines beeped when done. Officers gave each other nods and called it efficiency. Ellie never beeped. She never rushed. She didn't compete for time slots or show off a record. She just folded. It was easy to forget she was there. Surrounded by chrome and coded systems, she might as well have been a shadow stitched into the floor. But her space was clean, always organized. Her tools were simple but worn from use, not neglect. The newer cadets sometimes wondered why someone like her was still around. No one gave them an answer. Maybe they thought she was part of a contractor deal, some budget holdover waiting for her final day. Maybe they didn't think of her at all. The irony was hard to miss if you were paying attention. In a place built on precision, she worked by feel. In a base that prized speed, she moved with purpose. Her pace didn't slow to prove anything. It was just hers. Dry Ridge had forgotten its roots. The photos of older generations once framed in the hallway had been removed to make space for mission charts and digital displays. No one mentioned the days when everything was packed by hand, when riggers earned trust by the lives they protected. Ellie remembered, not with nostalgia but with duty. While the machines clipped and snapped and auto-checked every seam, she tugged cords tight by instinct. Her fingers could feel tension better than sensors could read it. When the machines hesitated over a repack warning, she had already spotted the weak line by eye. But she never said that out loud. She didn't argue. She didn't offer corrections. She let the base keep moving as it liked. Let the officers sip coffee and wave styluses in the air while the auto units hissed and clicked behind them. She just folded. And every time she did, it felt like someone remembering how to breathe when the air had gotten too loud. Section 3. Conflict. The mockery and the challenge. 3.1. The mockery. When silence meets arrogance. The bag hit the mat with a thud, canvas on canvas, loud enough to draw a few heads. Lieutenant Jake Brandt stood over it, one hand on his hip, the other flicking a glove off his fingers like the show had already started. He looked down at Ellie with a smirk, then nodded at the parachute, as if to say your move. Around them, the hangar didn't stop, but it slowed. A few officers leaned away from their stations, watching from the corners of their eyes. One of them nudged another and whispered something that made them both laugh under their breath. Ellie didn't flinch. She reached forward, took the bag in both hands, and unzipped it without a sound. Her fingers moved smoothly, laying out the panels as if nothing unusual had happened. Her knees settled into the mat with practiced ease, like she'd been folding on that same spot her whole life. Jake crouched nearby, loud enough for others to hear. Said something about relics and rotary phones, how maybe she still used wax seals or carried a clipboard from the 80s. The instructors behind him chuckled, not because the joke was clever, but because it was safe. She brushed her hand across the first panel and adjusted the seam. Her eyes stayed down her face, unreadable. The parachute fabric shifted under her touch with a whisper, light and crisp. Someone else said she looked like a librarian folding bedsheets. One of the techs from diagnostics leaned against a crate and pretended to pray, saying maybe she'd chant the chords into behaving. The laughter swelled a little, not cruel, but careless. Ellie pulled the main risers into alignment. Her left thumb smoothed a ridge in the mesh. Her right hand traced the cord back to its base, checking tension with a light tug. She worked as if no one else was there. Jake tapped a boot against the floor loud enough to break the rhythm. Said maybe they should tag her pack with a throwback sticker, see if it sings Motown when it opens. The guy next to him laughed so hard he dropped his coffee. Still, Ellie folded. Each step precise. Her hands moved in clean motions, deliberate and steady. The noise around her faded the way wind pulls away from a closed door. She smoothed the panels, looped the cord, checked the anchor, reset a line with the edge of her knuckle. More people gathered. Some came for the joke, others out of curiosity. They leaned on crates or stood with crossed arms waiting for something to go wrong. No one expected much more than a quiet mistake. Ellie adjusted the canopy edge with both palms, then reached for the pack flap and drew it tight. A few steps remained. She paused for half a breath, adjusted her weight, and began the final coil. Jake turned to one of the instructors and asked if she even knew the term for reserve delay. The instructor shrugged, smiled like he didn't care either way. The pack creaked slightly under Ellie's final press. Then it was done. She zipped it closed and set it beside her mat. One clean fold. No fuss, no announcement. Jake raised an eyebrow, looking down at the pack like it might bite him. He offered a mock salute, then muttered something about trusting Grandma hands. He didn't pick it up right away, just stared at it like it had answered back. Ellie returned to her own chute, rolled out the cord, reset her mat, said nothing. And though the crowd drifted, though the chatter returned, something quieter lingered behind. Not awe, not yet. Just a shift, a pause, a weight that no one could name, but no one could ignore. 3.2. The jump. Chaos in the sky. One fold that held. The C-130 roared at altitude, the ramp yawning open like a mouth ready to swallow the sky. Inside, 5 officers stood in line, suited in black oxygen tubes, trailing visors locked. The red light above the door blinked steady, casting the cargo bay in flashes of warning. Ground crews watched from below, eyes fixed on screens, radios buzzing with final checks. The Pentagon official stood at the observation deck, arms crossed, not blinking. The first jumper stepped off clean and vanished into open air. Then the second, then the third. That's when the comms snapped with static and someone shouted from the telemetry panel. Jumper 3 was spinning. His chute had twisted cords tangling mid-deploy canopy, flaring sideways like a broken wing. Altitude dropped fast, 1,000 feet gone in seconds. Ground crews shouted for reserve deploy voices overlapping with panic. Jumper 2's canopy delayed. The chute jerked out slow, catching unevenly as the lines fluttered, tangled in cross-tension. He yanked the release on the reserve, but the backup caught on exit and bloomed late, jerking him upright just above 6,000. Jumper 5 fell wrong. One panel didn't fully deploy. His descent listed hard left foot drifting off axis as he fought the toggle's arms, flailing to recover control. His chute caught wind too shallow, dragging him sideways toward the far field. Only 2 jumpers remained in sequence. Jake Brandt stood at the edge, turned once toward the line, then jumped. His silhouette dropped fast, body streamlined. At 12,000 feet, his chute opened smooth. Perfect bloom. Full canopy. Tight lines. The shape held steady, no drag, no roll. He floated down like the air knew him by name. The last jumper followed. His chute opened, but too fast. A release snapped wide, twisting the risers. He fought it hard, body flipping once before stabilizing at a brutal angle. On the ground, officers scrambled. Medics ran. Radios crackled with codes. The Pentagon official lowered his binoculars with a sharp breath. Only one figure in the sky descended clean. Jake landed soft boots, hitting dirt with barely a shift in weight. He stood straightened, looked up. The chute lay behind him in a flawless coil. No one said anything right away. Everyone was watching the screens. Everyone was counting who made it down and how. Only one chute had worked the way it was supposed to. The one packed by hand. Section 4. Inner emotion. Her reason to return. The conference room felt colder than the hangar. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting everything in a hard, flat glow. Screens lined the walls, each showing angles of the jump frame by frame. Jake sat near the back, still in half gear, his helmet resting on his lap. His eyes stayed on the chute footage, replaying in silence. Around the table, instructors and officers traded clipped words, some still too stunned to speak. Colonel Mercer stood at the head, silver hair, sharp jaw, tight. The Pentagon official remained seated, one leg crossed, face unreadable. Nobody looked at the woman standing just inside the door. Ellie didn't move. She held nothing in her hands. No papers, no gear, just herself. Her boots were dusty from the ramp. Her badge still read support tech. Mercer called her name without lifting his eyes. She stepped forward, slowly stopping at the edge of the table. The folder he opened was thick edges curled from time. He read it aloud like it wasn't real. Eleanor Hayes, aircrew flight equipment, certified master rigger, enlisted in 1997, over 2,000 logged jump packs, 0 failures. A long pause settled. Then he turned the page. She was trained under Master Chief Alan Dunn, last certifier of the Legacy Manual, co-author of the final revision 2006. The room stayed silent. No one knew what to say. She hadn't said a word since walking in. He looked up at her and asked the only question that mattered. "Why did you come back?" She breathed once through her nose eyes on the table, then lifted them and spoke clearly. "My husband." Jake leaned forward slightly, hands frozen. Mercer stayed still. She said his name was Jonah. Staff sergeant. He jumped out of Falcon Ridge 13 years ago. His chute never opened. There was a mechanical variance. The machine said it packed right. It didn't. She said she left after that. Couldn't touch a line. Couldn't walk into a hangar. Not for a long time. But time doesn't always heal. Sometimes it hardens into something else. One day she saw a post. Dry Ridge needed riggers. Not full-time. Not command. Just someone to handle overflow. She didn't tell anyone who she used to be. She didn't come for title or notice. She came because someone had to care about the cord, about the tension, about what people stopped checking. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about making sure no one else paid the same price she had. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't cry. She just said what needed to be said. Because if the machines forget how to listen, someone has to remember what it costs. Someone has to feel the weight of the fold. Someone has to care enough to stay invisible if that's what it takes. No one in that room could look away. Even the official had shifted in his seat. Ellie stood without flinching. Not small, not meek, just steady. The kind of steady that holds when everything else breaks. And for the first time they saw her, not just the woman in the corner, but the reason 5 people jumped that day, and only 1 came down clean. Section 5. Twist. The truth behind the hands. 5.1. The recognition. A record that changed everything. Colonel Mercer didn't sit. He stood with both hands on the edge of the table, staring down at the folder as if seeing it for the first time. The room had gone quiet again, only the soft hum of the screen still playing the jump replay in the background. He read her name once more, slower this time. Eleanor Hayes. The voice he used now wasn't the clipped tone of command. It was measured, grounded in something heavier. She had over 2 decades of service. Certified in static line MFF Halo. Trained under Chief Dunn, one of the last men trusted to pack chutes for combat search and rescue. Her hands had touched more than 2,000 rigs. Not one had failed. She didn't just train under the old manual, she helped write it. Her notes were part of the final revision. Field-tested, adjusted under fire, signed off by 2 divisions. No one said a word. The officers who used to chuckle now stared at the floor. Jake stood still at the back of the room, eyes fixed on her. Mercer lifted the final sheet. Her resignation letter dated 13 years ago. Handwritten. Attached to it was a copy of the incident report. 1 shoot. 1 failure. Her husband. Then he looked at her and asked if she understood what was about to happen. She nodded once. Nothing else moved. He turned toward the rest of the room, voice low but final. Effective immediately, no chute would be packed on base without her signature protocol. She would instruct the rigging division, verify every method, rewrite every line if she had to. No more assumptions, no more shortcuts. Dry Ridge would not risk another life on speed over skill. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It was something better. Recognition built on proof. The weight in the room shifted. Officers who hadn't looked at her all week now saw someone they would follow without question. Not because of title, but because she had already done what the rest had failed to do. She didn't react. No smile. No victory. Just a quiet breath, like someone who had finally set something down. Ellie didn't come to take over. She came because she couldn't bear to leave it to chance. And now, for the first time in years, someone had finally listened. 5.2. The first lesson. Respect woven into every fold. The hangar looked different that morning. The machines were powered down. The music that usually echoed through the rafters had been silenced. Rows of chairs stretched from the far wall to the mat near the center. Every seat was filled. Officers, riggers, instructors, and cadets sat with their backs straight and their hands still. At the front, the canvas mat lay unrolled. It was older than most of the people in the room, its corners frayed, the stitching faded from use. Beside it, a chart stood on a folding board, half showing digital schematics, half showing diagrams drawn by hand. Ellie walked in from the far entrance. Her boots were quiet on the concrete. She wore the same brown jumpsuit, no insignia, no clipboard, no announcements. She carried a single chute. It was folded tightly under one arm, the lines tucked in clean. No one spoke as she passed. Even the rustling of uniforms stilled. She stepped onto the mat without pausing, without looking at the room, without asking for attention. She knelt slowly, setting the chute in front of her. Then she opened it panel by panel, her hands moving with the same calm rhythm they always had, not rushed, not hesitant, just sure. In the front row, Jake Brandt sat motionless. His helmet rested on the ground. His hands stayed on his knees. Ellie didn't glance up. She didn't explain anything. She folded. The nylon shifted beneath her fingers like it knew her. She smoothed each panel flat, checked the seams with 2 fingers, and pulled the risers through in quiet sequence. Her body moved with practiced ease, not showing, not performing. Just doing the work. One of the techs near the wall leaned forward without realizing. Another officer, who once called her a relic, had a notebook open in his lap, but hadn't written a word. They watched every movement like it was a language they didn't know how to read. She reached the midpoint, looped the tension lines around her palm, and tugged with soft pressure. She pivoted on one knee and began the final series of folds. Still no one spoke. The room didn't breathe loudly. Even the air seemed to listen. She finished the pack and pressed the final curve down with her palm. Then she stood, stepped back, and left the chute where it lay. Colonel Mercer rose from his seat. His voice didn't carry far, but it didn't have to. This is your new standard. No one clapped. That wasn't the moment. The silence itself had said everything. The change had already begun. The hangar was nearly empty again. No engines running, no chatter bouncing off the walls, just the low hum of the overhead lights and the soft creak of metal shifting in the rafters. Ellie knelt at the same spot she always did. The canvas mat lay open beneath her knees, smoothed flat from years of use. A fresh chute was stretched out in front of her, its lines resting in gentle coils like they were waiting for her hands. She moved with the same pace, the same care. Nothing about her rhythm had changed. Her fingers pinched, tucked, tested, pressed like they had 1,000 times before. There was no crowd now. No officers watching, no cameras filming each movement, just her, the chute, and the slow beat of her breathing. The waxed cord slid through her fingers, warm from touch, pulling clean through the last loop. She adjusted the flap, reset the edge, and leaned slightly forward to smooth the canopy's curve. Outside, a breeze drifted through the open bay doors, tugging softly at the far corner of the mat. Dust gathered in the cracks near the wall, but it never reached her workspace. 2 recruits passed by the entrance, their boots soft on the concrete. One of them slowed just a little, tilting his head toward the floor where she knelt. He whispered low enough for her not to hear, but she caught the shape of it in the air. "That's her, the one who saved a guy mid-air." The other recruit nodded. Neither of them stepped inside. They just kept walking, voices fading down the corridor. Ellie didn't look up. She didn't react. Her hands stayed steady as she folded the final panel, slid it into place, and pressed the line into a tight coil. She tied the last knot with quiet precision, not fast, not slow, just right. Then she reached for the edges of the mat and ran her palms over them, pressing them flat again, resetting the space for the next chute. The gesture was simple but deliberate, a kind of punctuation only she understood. When the pack was complete, she sat back on her heels and looked once at the chute. Her expression didn't change. Her body didn't shift like someone who expected recognition. She wasn't here to be noticed. She was here because someone else would jump tomorrow, and they deserved to land. The hangar stayed quiet. She gathered the chute, set it aside, and reached for another. Her movements never broke pace. Some people leave legacy in loud speeches or written orders. Ellie left hers in folds and lines pulled tight in silence that said everything. The final fold settled into place with the softest sound. Just fabric pressing into fabric, nothing dramatic, nothing meant for an audience. Ellie's hands paused for a moment, resting lightly on the chute, as if marking the end of something only she understood. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She simply adjusted the line, smoothed the surface one last time, and tied it closed with quiet care. There was no one watching this time. No screen flickering with data, no officer timing her work, no camera catching the angle of her hands. But she moved as if every second still mattered. The mat beneath her had taken on a shape that didn't belong to the military anymore. It felt more like a page, something written on, not with words, but with rhythm, with weight, with patience. She had taught from it, without ever speaking. Ellie leaned back slightly and looked at the packed chute beside her. Not for approval, not even for peace, just long enough to know it was done right. She stood slowly, her knees steady, her posture unchanged. She placed the rig into its crate, closed the lid, and reset the mat again, just as she always had. Corners aligned, creases flattened, the space cleared for whoever came next. She didn't need applause. She didn't need a plaque or a ceremony or her name on a wall. She knew what she had done. She knew what it meant. And somewhere in the quiet corners of Dry Ridge, that knowledge would remain folded into the routines of those who now followed her path. Tighter seams, slower hands, a little more care when no one was looking. Sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that never raised itself. Ellie never shouted. She never asked to lead. She just did the work exactly the way it needed to be done. And when she stepped off the mat for the last time that day, the silence she left behind felt like something sacred, something earned, something true.